Oh my God, Becky, look at her butt.
Welcome to the Stop Chasing Skinny radio program. This program is designed to bring to you everything else in your life that might help you create a fit life. Tonight, I decided to bring on a guest in a series of shows because February is the National Eating Disorder Awareness Month. And so a lot of information is being put out about this, and I wanted to put together a series of shows because I see a lot of things happening on my end as a fitness professional that people may not necessarily realize, or they don't know where to get help and that kind of thing. So my very first show in this series is with Dr. Jill Ilagan. Is that how you pronounce it?
Ilagan,
sorry. Ilagan. She's a local therapist here in Charleston, and we are going to cover disordered eating. So disordered eating is something that I feel like is the number one as far as the clients that I see and the people that I interact with on a regular basis. Disordered eating, very much in society, it's very acceptable, if not expected. The fact that I don't weigh myself on a regular basis, it may seem odd. Counting calories in, calories out, I don't do that either. And some people will say, oh my gosh, what kind of fitness professional are you? Well, I'm one that likes to not live by numbers like that, because that's not really living to me. So anyway, I want to welcome on Dr. Jill Ilagan. I will get it by the end.
Like Aladdin.
Like Aladdin. Great. So welcome, and please explain just a little bit more about your background and how you got into this field.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for having me. And my name's Dr. Jill Ilagan. I usually just have people call me Dr. Jill, though. That makes things a little bit easier. Okay, you feel free to just call me Jill, by all means. But yeah, I'm a psychologist here in Charleston, and I have a private practice in Mount Pleasant where I specialize in treating people who struggle with disordered eating. I also see people, with a range of problems from anxiety to depression and relationship issues, but really my specialty is around disordered eating and eating disorders. And so that's what I do for my profession. I like doing things outdoors as well. Love to stand up paddleboard.
We share that love for sure.
Love to bike and just get outside anytime it's sunny and warm enough. So
yeah, that's great. That's really great. And I love how you just brought in the anxiety and depression into the eating. Into your the eating practice. It is all tied together.
Yeah.
If there is an issue with eating, it's stemming from somewhere else, right?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and anxiety is usually one of the primary things that I find with people who are struggling with something around eating. There really does seem to be a high level of anxiety, and sometimes the behaviors are there to help someone cope with that anxiety.
Yeah, I have to say, so I was a binge eater with the best of them, but I ended up exercising to get rid of all the extra food I ate. But yes, it's therapeutic in a way to stand there and just put food in your mouth.
Yes,
right?
It is.
Yeah,
people wouldn't do it if there wasn't a reason for it.
Right. So, so which brings me kind of around to my very first point of let's talk about what disordered eating looks like.
Okay.
So I kind of touched a little bit on counting calories in, calories out, and that's not just coming up with a baseline. That's like obsessing about the calories, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then maybe weighing ourselves too frequently, placing too much value on that. What are some things? And you can feel free to talk a little bit more about those too.
Okay, yeah. Well, and I think that what can help with sort of defining disordered eating is just sort of briefly mentioning what it's not. So, eating disorders are disorders like anorexia or bulimia or binge eating disorder that people are familiar with, that where someone meets clinical criteria for that specific disorder. But then you have a whole slew of behaviors outside of that criteria where it's still problematic for people, and it still interferes with their functioning and their quality of life. but it doesn't quite meet the clinical criteria for an eating disorder. So then some people, and that's kind of entered into our vernacular to talk about it as disordered eating. And so that can be the counting calories, that can be the weighing, that can be, there's a lot of body image stuff that's usually wrapped up in that, that a person's self-worth comes solely from the number on the scale and how close they can get to an idealized body type that they have in their head. And some of the other behaviors that go along with that, whether it's over-exercising, laxative use, and then a lot of the feelings that go along with that, feeling shamed about your body, feeling guilty about how you're eating your food, how you're not eating your food. And it just takes up more and more and more time and energy in someone's head.
Yeah, and that's such a great point. I know that, when I would obsess over the food, it did take up so much headspace. I mean, there were so many things that you miss out on socially, or it does affect you socially. I have heard on multiple occasions where somebody will get on the scale, and that number, whatever they see in the morning, that sets the tone for maybe not even their entire day, maybe their whole week. That they were unhappy with that number. I've done a couple of things that I'm actually going to put this in the show notes, where I am 23 pounds more now than what I was about 4 years ago, but I look the same. And so stay off the scale. Like it doesn't really represent anything solid. It's just this number that we put out there. And then also with technology, and I mean, it was in the magazines for years, believe me, but you see all these different things about counting the numbers and paying attention to the numbers. It makes it very easy to obsess, right?
Sure. Yes. Yeah. Numbers really do stick in people's head. That's something that's concrete, it's measurable, and that helps people not feel as anxious.
Right? Because it gives you guidelines.
Yeah. As long as it's going in the right direction. And then when it's going in the wrong direction, then you see the anxiety peak. And then these behaviors come in to get the number going back into the right direction so that the anxiety can decrease. Numbers, I tell people that I don't really do numbers, that I don't need to know. I'm not going to check in on how many calories they're eating. I'm not going to check in how much they weigh. I leave that to nutritionists and physicians that I work with. They're kind of in charge of the numbers, and I get to work more with people on who they are and their goals and what they're trying to accomplish.
And then do you find too that after you've been working with somebody for a little while, maybe they don't need those numbers anymore? Do they kind of abandon that?
Eventually. Sometimes numbers stick around for a while, and even if they're not, a lot of people will take a scale out of their house so they don't have access to a scale or a tape measure possibly. But it's still in their head. Even if they're not engaging in the behaviors around weighing or around counting calories, it's still kind of in their head. And that kind of actually sticks around for a while, but it does eventually go away. But it's not really one of the first things to go.
Yeah. Yeah. I know with my program, we talk about non-scale victories. Actually, it was, so I was saying stay off the scale. And one of my clients, she was the one that told me about the term. But we talk about non-scale victories. So we talk about did I increase the number of repetitions that I could complete in the allotted time? And did I increase my weight that I was lifting? And did I notice, even non-scale victories such as it was so much easier for me to vacuum my steps today.
Yes.
so those things, is that something that, somebody could maybe shift their thinking a little bit by choosing to focus on those numbers?
For sure. Okay. Yeah. I think that, that really anytime you can give people more than one thing to gauge their progress on, that even if you only use the number of reps, that could become out of balance. So you need a number of things, I think, to let people know that they're progressing in the way that they want to be progressing. Yeah. For some people, they reach a point where they can go back and use the scale in a way that doesn't become obsessive. It's not damaging to them. Some people, they can't get to that point. But anytime you have a number of things that you can use to look and be like, okay, I've made this progress on this and progress on this. And that can be even outside of fitness and even, goals that someone might be meeting with regards to work or relationship goals. Maybe a certain hobby or skill set where their self-worth is, the input of their self-worth is being measured by something other than a number on a scale.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm so glad you talked about that, because that's what I found with myself was that once, and I can look at this over my whole entire life, the more into the fitness piece I was, whether it was, and like the scale, I guess the scale was part of it, but the more into that piece I was, I found that it was because I was much less fulfilled in a lot of the other areas of my life. Like I wasn't fulfilled in my work, so I spent more time working out, and it was kind of a coping mechanism, and I've made my way through it. But I did go through a period of time where it was super obsessive in the exercise department.
Yeah, and that shift can happen where people find, it doesn't happen all at once. If it happened all at once, less people would have this struggle, but it is just slowly over time, more and more energy goes to this one area, and then that leaves less energy for other areas. Yeah. That's and it's exhausting for people who are around who don't have this same obsession with fitness or numbers or diet or whatever. It is exhausting. It's hard to carry on relationships with people who do. Because you feel like, as the person being that into it, you feel like isolated.
Sure. And as the person who's really not into that, you're kind of annoyed by it, because you're like, can we move on to something that's like, a little less fitness?
That does happen. And so then I think people start surrounding themselves with more and more like-minded people, and then that can kind of, at the same time, in one way it's good because they are sort of at least surrounded by people, but in another way it can be detrimental in that they're surrounded by only other like-minded people who might have a tendency to be a little obsessed about the same thing they are.
Yes.
So they're not getting other input from people who prefer, to watch movies or do art or do crafting or whatever,
Yeah, I do know, because I so a lot of the listeners, they did find me through my competitive fitness background. I competed as a figure competitor, and then I also coached as a figure competitor, or as a coach in that field. And so now when I get around some of my fitness friends that I competed with, if they still compete, they want to talk about macronutrients, and I just have to I'm really trying to just walk away from the conversation, because I'm like, I can't know. I'm not talking about grams of protein and fat and carbohydrates.
Yeah.
I just, because I can't do it. So, So I feel like, that took up a ton of my headspace. And, once I kind of figured out my formula for it, like I don't need to obsess over that stuff anymore. And could I be more ripped? Sure. But it's not worth it to me.
Yeah.
So,
Yep.
I feel like balance. That's the best reward. That's the huge trophy right there.
Right. Yeah. And balance is a big piece of what I work with people on, is trying to move them towards balance. That lots of times disordered eating will have them be on really extreme ends of the spectrum. Either they're eating a ton or they're not eating at all. They're exercising a ton or they're not exercising at all. And that moving towards balance is really kind of the opposite of where that disordered eating exists. And so as they move towards balance, their perspective starts to shift, and they have less and less room for being in those extremes.
Yeah,
less
like it's
and less
kind
time.
of, they're not, they used to be compelled to count those things, and now they're kind of like pushed away from those.
Yeah. Or even just, I could count that, or I could just, go have a glass of wine with a girlfriend. And that sounds way more fun than counting the calories and worrying about how much I'm going to consume.
Yeah.
So it can't even
and that
just be
food
that.
guilt, right? Like,
Yeah.
That's the worst feeling ever.
Yeah.
Once you can stop that cycle too. I know I used to eat like And one of the things too that, and maybe there's something different here, but one of the things that I read was talking about how during the day, some of the reasons we overeat at night is because during the day our cortisol levels are really high and we're busy and we're doing stuff, and then in the evening our cortisol levels kind of come down, and we have time and we have access to the food, and there are other chemical things going in our bodies, and then that's when we want to eat. So like if you feel like you turn into a werewolf when the sun goes down, which is what I felt like for years. Yeah. You stand there and you eat like the peanut butter out of the jar with the spoon or whatever. And then you go to bed, and then you wake up in the morning, you're like, oh, I did it again.
Yeah.
It's nice to break that cycle and not have that food guilt.
Yeah. And part of it's helping people identify when they are most vulnerable to those types of behaviors, So a similar kind of explanation is that, our self-control is really a muscle. And just like, as you can fatigue a muscle, but if you can also not work out a muscle and it can atrophy, and you want to find somewhere in the middle with that self-control muscle so that you are left with something left over at night.
That's so interesting you say that, because I was just listening to a book the other day that was talking about that, and they were saying that it is possible to over-exercise it during the day and not have anything left for it at night. Actually, it was a book on charisma.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Which is so funny because they weren't talking about food at all.
Yeah.
But they were talking about willpower.
Yeah.
And so if you only have a certain amount, and so if you use it all up during the day, then you're it's kind of gone at the end. Yeah.
And even decisions not related to food and exercise wear on that self-control muscle or use it. So if you're having to make decisions at work about, something that's completely not food related, it's still pulling on that same muscle as when you get home and you decide if you're going to eat the peanut butter or not.
Yeah. And then the peanut butter is not going to make you lose your job or affect that part. So you're like, well, whatever. All right, this is the one thing I can do here, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, that just knowing that helps to take away some of that food guilt, and understand where you can maybe decrease some of the stressors during your day so you can make better choices later on at night.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, we're going to take just one quick break. When we come back, I want to talk about treatment options for this. So now that we've kind of defined what it is, I want to move forward with some more of these techniques that we can talk about. Welcome back to the Stop Chasing Skinny radio show. So now we are going to talk about some of the different techniques that we can use to help, I say it's just to gain more freedom, right?
Yes, that's a great way to put it.
Yeah, you're going to free up some of that headspace so you don't worry so much about the food and the numbers. Oh my gosh, seriously, I kept those spreadsheets of whenever I kept my macronutrient breakdown. It was ridiculous how much time I spent.
That's a lot of numbers, I bet.
And I was good at it. I was a nuclear engineer before I did fitness. So I was all over numbers. So yeah, Dr. Jill, if you could just tell us a little bit more about some of these different techniques for getting past some of these blocks, these barriers.
Okay, yeah. Well, there's a number of different ways that people might go about treating disordered eating, and I'm not going to get into all of those. One of the ones that I use probably the most is something called narrative therapy. And just the short elevator speech about narrative therapy is it's really changing a person's storyline about their life. So they come in and they have a problem storyline, and you help them build this alternative storyline.
So an example of this storyline, because I hear this a lot, I used to say it myself. Well, I'm the kind of person who, if I'm going to have some of it, I'm going to have all of it.
Yes.
Okay. So like you just told that story, that's how it's going to work.
Yeah, I'm an all or nothing person, and that's part of that problem storyline. And I've always been that way, and I can't change it. So then I get really interested in, well, have they really always been that way? Have there been exceptions to that storyline? And if so, what were they and what was going on at that time? So that they start to identify coping skills they really already have within themselves, where they were able to overcome the problem or get some distance from that problem storyline. So that's kind of the theory behind narrative therapy in a nutshell.
Because I had to do some of that. I say too, like, if this is the advice I give, if you're going to go to a party, a holiday event, something like that, if you walk up to that buffet table and you start telling people like, oh, I really shouldn't, but like, that's, you may as well just shove the food in your mouth, because you're probably going to end up that way. So if you just change that story from the beginning and you go to it and you don't don't pay it any mind, just have whatever you need to have for food and stop telling that story, because that's part of the storyline, is telling somebody else I shouldn't, having the other person say, go ahead and do it.
Right.
And then you do it and then you go, oh, I shouldn't have, I'm bad. Like that, I hear that a lot. I mean, I told myself that story all the time. Yeah. So you just stop it, right? Like you just.
Yeah. And sometimes it's hard to just stop it. And so sort of finding ways to change it and shift the focus again. So one of those techniques that I use, it's called externalizing. It was made really popular by a book called Life Without Ed, Ed being eating disorder, by Jenny Schaefer.
We'll put that in the show notes too, so you guys can link to that.
Yeah, and it's a great book for anyone who struggles with whether it's disordered eating or an eating disorder, or even knows someone that they really care about who struggles with this. It's really enlightening. She framed it as such that Ed was really an abusive partner that she was getting a divorce from. And so you externalize the problem, and, we're talking about disordered eating today. So I thought, well, let's not call it Ed, because you're going to talk about Ed on another show later on this week, or this month. And so we could call it DEET. So like D for disordered, and then EAT for eating. So we could just call it DEET. Okay. And so, when we talk about DEET, we can kind of talk about it in terms of how DEET affects someone. If you're hanging out with DEET, what are you doing? How does DEET impact your relationships with other people? And that what this allows is this space for people to get a perspective on that storyline or on that problem. And they can really see what DEET is up to. Well, DEET makes me feel bad about eating what I ate, and so then I stay inside. So I really haven't been spending as much time with my friends, and I've been spending more time with DEET, especially at night. And so they can get a clearer grasp on what this problem looks like, and then they can start making decisions about how they want to change that.
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
Yeah. And it can be very powerful for people.
Yeah.
To kind of even just to feel the sense of relief. It kind of relieves some self-blame, because they're kind of able to blame things on DEET. And kind of paradoxically, it increases control and responsibility, because now they're making a choice about what they're going to do with regards to DEET, as opposed to feeling like they're just being controlled by DEET.
That's great. Because then, I'm such a visual person. Like, I totally, I just made DEET some dude that was like gross and, a jerk. And so, like, whenever you said, like, spending time at night with DEET, I was like, no, I totally picture it, like, opening the door and showing him out and shutting the door and being like, nope, I'm good here.
Yes.
I don't need you in here. No, we're good.
Yeah.
That's.
Yeah. And those kind of visual things can stick with people even in the moment where maybe they're hesitating whether or not to shove DEET out the door. If they've already kind of visualized that, it oftentimes makes it easier to do it again or do it in real life.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I never really, and I am such a visual person. I'm totally going to picture this now.
Yeah. And it's, some people come up with their own names for it. And that's what I always encourage, because then it's closest to their individual experience of what they're dealing with. For some people, it's male. For some people, it's female. For some people, it's gender neutral. So it's also a creative exercise that can be used. Even then you can have them draw and represent their relationship with DEET. So you can even pull some creative aspect into that creation as well.
Yeah. Well, I do a lot of reading about the law of attraction, and you talk about the things that you want to have in your life, and those are the things you focus on. And so I try to help my clients reframe what they don't want in their food world to what they do want. And so that's where I was saying, like, if you go to an event or something like that, I would rather hear somebody say, "Oh, I just choose to have this, this, and this," versus going, "I don't want to overeat. I don't want to do this. I don't," And so I guess so. It's kind of the same thing with what you're saying, to build their new storyline.
Yeah, because I use this, the same idea with my clients. It's kind of like if you're riding a bike, you look where you want to go, not where you don't want to go, because you're going to hit whatever you don't want to go.
Or if you look at it. That's not good either.
Yeah, exactly. Or where you've been. Yeah. So I've experienced that myself on the Greenway, riding between those pylons. I have to always tell myself, look in the middle of them. Don't look at them.
It's so true. It's so true.
Yeah.
So what are some other techniques that you like to use, or just different tips that somebody could just take away and start to improve their life right now?
Yeah. Well, I think, sort of starting with that, externalizing and really filling that in, and even writing about it, journaling about it, drawing a picture about it, can be really helpful. A good starting place. And then from there, they can kind of in their head start to utilize that. So if they hear that they shouldn't go out to eat, then they can question that and be like, okay, do I not want to go out to eat, or does DEET not want me to go out to eat? Yeah. So then they start focusing on what they want. And that's really the heart of the matter for me, is helping them figure out what they want to do. Lots of people leave behind passions and hobbies and people, frankly, in choosing to be with DEET. And so if you kind of fill up, decide what you want, to get back in touch with things you used to do before DEET showed up in your life, that really goes a long way to pushing DEET further and further to the outskirts of your life.
Yeah. And it's such a, I feel like it's a fine line to walk. It's a challenge between, because like I said, I was a competitive fitness athlete. Like that was my passion. And I learned so many great things about it. I absolutely loved it. I really did.
Yeah.
But there were a lot of sacrifices I had to make. And I was willing to make those. And even like going back, there are only certain things that I do now but I'm okay with that. I'm totally good with that, because I feel like my health has improved because I gave up certain behaviors. So I feel like the listener, you're probably like, okay, well, is my hobby or my goal, is it healthy, or is it too much?
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
Yeah.
I think it's just taking that perspective of like, what have I given up? And was I okay with giving it up? I was totally okay with giving up my binge drinking and overeating. Totally.
Yeah.
Because that wasn't serving me anyway.
Yeah.
So for me to give that up, I was fine with that. But there were certain things, like certain events that I really didn't feel like going to, because I knew I'd have to be around the food and I'd have to resist it, and I just didn't want to. So I missed out on the experience.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there's even balance within that. Certainly whenever we go after something we want, there's going to have to be sacrifices made. Yeah. And that, it is tricky figuring out, well, when have those sacrifices gone too far? Yeah. And that's part of constantly checking in with yourself. I can't tell anyone if it's gone too far. Even if I know it has, they have to figure it out for themselves. And that's what I can do, is help them kind of check in with themselves and be like, it's okay that I didn't go to this party where I knew there was going to be this buffet, but then I also didn't go to dinner with my girlfriends. And then I also didn't do this, and I also didn't do this. And so as you kind of string those things together, you can start to kind of notice the impact that it might be having on someone. And so that's where I kind of point people back to themselves and trusting themselves, which is really scary and a really important part of
that's huge
recovering.
That's what so much of it comes down to,
Yeah.
right? I have people who come to me, and I have a program where I offer 12 weeks of training, where they're a part of a group, and it's small group coaching, and that's how I do that. But I also offer one-to-one coaching if somebody wants one-to-one. One of the questions I ask on the application, because there is an application process, I won't work with every single person, because if you want me to help you self-abuse, we're not going to work together.
Yeah.
But sometimes what I'll see is the client applying has been to, like, I ask, like, have you tried other diets and other programs? And sometimes they've tried, like, every other one. And so that, that I have to take that into consideration. So I'm like, do you not trust yourself? And some people just haven't found what works for them yet.
Right.
And other people, they haven't found any, like, they don't trust themselves. So they always have to have somebody telling them exactly what to do.
Yeah.
My goal with my clients is to be able to help them create this life that they don't absolutely have to have me. I mean, I'm not looking for job security here.
Yeah.
Like, I would, sure, pay me to do the coaching piece, but I don't want somebody walking around with a piece of paper that's like, well, Stephanie said I could eat this and I could not eat that and have to eat this much of this, and that's not how I operate, because that's not how I would want to live. It's not living. It's and the same thing happens with with therapy, kind of working ourselves out of a job, hopefully, to where they don't need to come in as often and eventually ever. And the same with nutritionists, so there's a time for having people in your life who are helping you know what to do and who are guiding you, but at the same time not taking control away from you. If you're an adult, that's kind of like you want to find those people who can help you figure out what is best for you. Yeah. So we're going to take one more really quick break, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to the Stop Chasing Skinny radio show, where tonight we are talking about disordered eating, something I think is very prevalent, and it's actually kind of some of it can be, the main program that people are signing up for, like, do this and don't do that. And it's a little too restrictive. And like I said, I was prior military, and I really like being hardcore, but being too hardcore with your food can cause a lot of problems. So now I want to talk a little bit about comparisons, social media, and just media and the dieting industry in general, because we are bombarded by images every day. We are bombarded by the diet industry saying, you can get these results in this short amount of time. Here are some pictures. Being in the industry, it's amazing to me. I see quote unquote transformations happen. I know the behind the scenes on some of these where they're like, oh, this product is great. And I was like, no, you were taking drugs. I know you. So there's that. But it's hard to sift through that stuff. And then I think even on a subconscious level, even if, in the forefront of our minds, we're like, well, that doesn't make sense. But evolutionarily, our visual, like what we have been able to look at and what we put in our brain as real, like that happens, whether we're on guard or not. It still happens. So I want to talk a little bit about realistic expectations. Okay. When somebody is setting a goal, because you have to have goals, right? Like if you don't have goals, you're not going to go anywhere, and numbers are measurable. Right. So what kind of advice would you give to somebody on setting goals, especially since we get all of these random messages for us all the time? Yeah. Well, and it's important to, with those messages, really be able to look at them and look at them critically. And so there's, this whole kind of media literacy aspect, I think, to, I love that to term. Body image.
and being able to really, kind of discern, well, what is this product saying? What are they trying to sell here? What are they using to sell it? Is it realistic? And so that way you can kind of someone can start questioning, okay, is that the goal I want? So this product or this, person is sort of putting out, this is where you can get to. Yeah. And so you come up with that as, well, this is my goal. But then if you find out that it wasn't realistic, that you actually can't get there without drugs or some Photoshop or something else, then you might change your goal a little bit. So even before the goal setting, I would kind of, encourage people to think critically about their goals and make sure that they are realistic and that they aren't based on a lie that's being fed to them by the media or...
Yeah, that's good. I like that, like the media literacy.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
And, from my background and just playing with the camera, I know, so I learned this from my grandfather. He taught me how to make the fish bigger. We went fishing and I caught a fish and I said, will you take a picture of me, Grandpa? And he goes, yeah. And he goes, do you want to make it look really big? And I said, yeah. And so he goes, hold it really close to the camera. Anything that is closest to the camera is going to look really big.
Right.
The things that are behind, further away from the camera, are going to look not so big.
Yeah.
So guess what? I can make it look like my thighs don't touch. Like they are the smallest things ever. My thighs will always touch.
Yeah.
That's just from a camera angle.
Yeah.
If I angle it really high above me,
yep.
My shoulders and my chest and everything can look really big.
Yeah.
And then I can make my hips look really narrow and my thighs look really small.
Yeah.
So just understanding that there are tricks in this stuff. Like
yes.
it's not like it, I do have people who will show me a picture of their goal and I'm like, look, I can look at that from my standpoint and say that there are a lot of times I can tell if somebody's been using drugs or not.
Yeah.
Not always, but from my years in the industry, I can tell, or I can tell like some of the photoshopping that's been done.
Yeah.
The camera angles.
Yep.
Because I try to keep a lot of my images that are out there. One photographer in particular likes to like really make my skin very smooth, but outside of that, there's no photoshopping to make me leaner or anything. But I like to use a lot of images that just use lighting and they don't use Photoshop. They're pretty much unedited. But you can bet that I'm using Tanner. And I'm using angles and I'm using lighting.
Yeah, right.
And I'm probably prepped for that photo shoot, meaning that I went on something pretty restrictive for at least a couple days, if not a couple weeks prior to it.
Yeah.
So, walking around like that is not
feasible.
No.
Yeah. Well, and I meet people all the time in my work, and especially young girls who, I wish they could have that perspective. Someone who's been there who could say to them, that's not real. And I think more and more with some of the like Upworthy sites and sites where they kind of debunk the different photoshopping type
like Dove
things.
Does a good run.
Yeah. And they put out, that Target ad where the thigh gap was like a rectangle. Like it looked like she looked like a Barbie doll. Like it was so cut out like a rectangle, like up into her buttocks. But so stuff like that does get put out there if you're looking for it. But having someone who can say, hey, I've been there, this picture right here, and tell them exactly everything that went into it, I think would go a long way to helping these young girls especially know that this isn't what a real person looks like 24/7.
Yeah. Yeah.
That it was one instant with all these variables and...
Yeah, there are a lot of variables. I did put a blog post out. I may link that one in here too. No, I will now that I'm talking about it. But I put a blog post out about what I looked like 5 weeks prior to a competition one time. And it was just me. And I was, I'm a fit girl, but it was a big difference between that fit girl picture and then 5 weeks later at the competition.
Yeah.
I also put together like some of the things that I had to go through to get to that. And I was okay with that at the time.
Yeah.
But like my sleep was interrupted because I wasn't having enough carbohydrates. I was fuzzy thinking. Like it took me 3 times as long to do anything.
Yeah.
I was moody. And And it was like, that's no way to live, really.
Yeah.
You have a short-term goal and maybe you want to do something, but even more importantly is coming out of that in the right way. So you're not just like, oh yeah, like, party it up.
Yeah.
So and listeners, you follow me on social media because I do share that stuff a lot. I try to, know, I really do try to that. And because young girls, you're impressionable. I know I was super impressionable. I mean, it's so funny. I look at the old pictures of the competitors that I used to totally idolize. And now knowing what I know, I was like, you guys were on drugs. Never going to look like that.
Yeah. And if you had known that then when you're younger, maybe you would have been easier on yourself or something. It may have impacted, you still may have done the fitness competition, but maybe internally you would have been a little gentler with yourself.
You're absolutely right. Yeah. And one of the big things for me, so anybody who's, interested in this fitness competition thing, one of the big things for me was, I remember, during competition season, you only see your team at the competitions. And then outside of that, you don't really see each other very much. Well, unless you go to fitness camp in the middle of winter. And so I remember I was going to fitness camp in the middle of winter and I was so nervous because I was like, oh my God, she's going to hate me. She told me to gain like 5 to 7 pounds and I gained like 15 or 17 pounds. And oh my gosh, she's going to hate me. And I remember we were talking about off season and she goes, Stephanie, will you please stand up and pick your shirt up? And I was like, oh my God. And she's going to do it in front of everyone. And I raised my shirt up and I was like almost in tears. And she goes, see, this is what an off-season body should look like. And I was like, I did it right.
Oh, wow.
Because what she was trying to say is you can't, even the fitness coaches will tell you cannot stay lean all year round.
Right.
And that was such a relief for me.
Yeah, I bet.
And all the other girls said the same thing. It was so great. I showed up to fitness camp and realized that everybody puts a little extra weight on.
Yeah.
And it's not, it's just healthy weight. That's it.
Yeah.
So even fitness models don't walk around with 6-pack abs typically.
Yeah.
Some. But that's the very few.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So what else? Let's see. I want to talk a little bit too about maybe like some of the emotional things that we put together with food. Do you find that that's a big problem, like quote unquote good foods, quote unquote bad foods?
Yeah, I think that
eating?
Sort of moral, kind of putting that moral judgment on it because then people tend to then internalize it. So if they ate good food, they're a good person, and if they ate bad food, they're a bad person. And when really, maybe it's more effective or helpful to look at food as healthy or not healthy, or how it's functional for a particular purpose, instead of these kind of moral labels. But we come by that honestly, because back to the media literacy thing, if you look at commercials about food, you get like spiritual connotations, you get sexual connotations. So it can be, just this sort of sinful delight, or it can be this like amazing spiritual experience. So there, even in that marketing and branding, you have it's good food, it's bad food.
Wow, and that is on a much deeper level.
Yeah.
I didn't think about that.
Yeah.
Wow. So we take that in subconsciously, and we are processing that real good.
Yes. Yeah. So even just changing the language and makes you at least think about it. So if you start to say, this is really bad for me, and instead say, this is unhealthy for me, even just that change of language makes you go, gives you enough pause to think about how you're internalizing it yourself.
Yeah. I try to think about it in a way that, because I always see my body as being like trying to build something, right? Because I've found that once I shifted my thinking from the blasting fat and the burn it off and all that stuff, like that tearing it down perspective and like beating it into submission, to changing it to more of I am building the strongest body I can. And so I want to give it the best building blocks. I want that protein to build strong muscles. I want that fat to make me have like some nice shiny hair and skin. And I don't mean greasy, but you have to have fats. It makes your brain function better.
Right.
So that's kind of how I tried to to change the thinking that around food.
Yeah.
Because I do pay attention to if it's quote unquote good or bad. But, it's just like I wouldn't want to give myself garbage. It's not good fuel.
Right. And I think that metaphor is great, that in that perspective on doing something positive instead of the tearing it down, because then that can even help people who maybe don't want to have fat, but they can recognize the function of it.
Yeah.
In this goal that they have, this kind of bigger overarching goal of building a strong body.
Yeah. And I once read something too about, what do they say? Athletes fuel and train. So
yeah.
I can't remember who they said diet and exercise. I can't remember what they're like. Somebody diets and exercises, but athletes fuel and train.
Yeah.
And I mean, aren't we all kind of athletes? Like we're trying to build some strong bodies, and you don't have to want to go do a Spartan race like I do, but life is an event.
Yeah. And I think even just those small tweaks in the wording really does make a difference for people, and makes them think about it differently. Well, food is fuel. I do need food. And how can I use this fuel most efficiently in my life?
Yeah. Yeah. To build that good life.
Yeah.
To have good energy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think that a lot of times too, I don't know if you find this, but sometimes people are lacking energy in all of their lives, but they don't really make that connection that it's because they've been depriving themselves so much with food.
Yeah.
So
yes.
You do need fuel.
Yeah. Yes. And a lot of times there isn't that connection. And there's not that connection because they're so hyper focused on what they're not eating, and as opposed to what they are eating or what they want to eat to build a body. So they're really hyper focused on what they're not eating.
What can I cut out?
And then just cognitively, once you kind of aren't getting enough nutrition, then you're not thinking clearly anyway. And so it's much easier to stay in that trap of, well, but I'm this size and I'm this weight and I can run this far, and so I'm on the right track.
Yeah, it must be healthy.
Yeah, it must be healthy.
Yeah.
But cognitively, even the people in their lives can start to notice that they can't focus as well. They forget things. They're sluggish. They can see the ramifications of not getting enough of the nutrition.
Yeah, that's really tough.
Yeah.
And once you get into that, I think it's kind of hard to see it.
Yeah.
From the outside.
Yeah.
So we're going to take one more really quick break, and we will be back. You've heard me talk a lot about learning how to reach your fitness goals, and more frequently, how to look as fit as you feel, while learning to stop chasing skinny. And you've also thought to yourselves, yeah, I do want to reach my fitness goals in a shorter, more concise way, to stop wasting my time bouncing back and forth from fitness tip to fitness tip in magazines, wasting hours researching the latest and greatest diet, only to end up looking and feeling the same way you've been looking and feeling for years. And my guess is that you've been thinking about this for a long time. Am I right? I know the feeling because I played these games too, for a very long time, in fact. I'm here to tell you this. Stop thinking and sign up for the SK Fit Life Challenge, an online training, nutrition, and coaching program that will lead you through 12 weeks of step-by-step guidance to help you finally reach your goals of looking fabulous and feeling fabulous. You're going to get to free up all the headspace you've been wasting picking through random diet information being fed to you through the media and simplifying the seemingly complicated world of health. Your chances now. Do you really need more time, more information, more plans for the future? Or do you want to become that fit person today? Because the truth is this. You can be that fit person, or you can be the person that sits around thinking about becoming fitter. It's your choice. Read more magazines, blog posts, and bits and pieces on social media, or take action. Because let's face it, if you're not where you want to be, your current program is not working out for you. I want you to be successful. And why is this? because you've already got what it takes. You've been doing the work all along. It's just been the wrong work. You have the desire, the discipline, and the potential. Now let's get you on the right track so those efforts you are already putting in can take you in the best direction possible. Join me and the hundreds of other SK Fit Life clients for the 12-week online fitness challenge at skfitlife.com. All right, now let's get back to the show. Welcome back to the Stop Chasing Skinny radio show, where today we are talking about disordered eating. This is something super near and dear to my heart. I went through it for a very long time. I called it fitness, because it's easy to say, oh no, I'm just working towards a goal. So at what point does your goal start to impact your life? So a lot of people have heard my story with my adrenal failure, and a lot of people didn't, and I have more to add to it. So real quick, I started, so a little further back, I spent a ton of time running. I love to binge eat, so I would run and calculate out how many miles do I have to run to get rid of all that food that I just ate, which was terrible. It was not a good way to live. I never actually reached my goals. I had to spend a ton of time running, and it really beat down my body. And like I said, I never reached my goals. I never looked the way that I wanted to look. So after several years of doing this, I moved to Seattle, where it was rainy all the time. And, well, I didn't like running in the rain, so I got to find something different. So I picked up Oxygen magazine, started looking at how to lift weights better. Okay, so that's what I started doing. In there, I saw that there were these fitness competitions. So I thought, that sounds really cool. I was also at a time in my life where I was lacking fulfillment in my job big time. So I started training. I found a coach. I started training for these fitness competitions. And actually, the nutritionist I was working with at the time really wasn't paying attention to me and my check-in pictures, and dieted me into oblivion. Right now, I'm like 5'9", 156, 158 pounds, something like that. I competed at 118 pounds. So that was really, really lean.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that it was a problem at the time, because I am just like a pit bull. If I latch onto something, I will do it. Plus, I had somebody who was telling me to do it. So I was like, oh, she's the professional. I should be doing this. So talk about some problems in my life. I had really bad problems focusing. I was tired all the time. My skin was getting really gross. My hair was not good. I didn't have my period for 4 whole years.
Wow.
I did this first season of competition is when this happened. Right after that, all of a sudden, I could not stop eating. I had night sweats. I just slept all the time. I was super depressed. I gained 50 pounds. I was in full on adrenal failure. Like, that's what I was. So, I had at that time, I kind of did it to myself. I kind of hired somebody to help me get there. I wish they would have said, no, this is maybe you're not.
A little too far.
That's a little too far. My coworkers told me I was going too far and were afraid that my organs were going to shut down.
Yeah.
It was the one time when my thighs did not touch. So I think, in my path, I think that it was all meant for a reason. I finally felt what it felt like to be really skinny. I was like, my size 2s were too loose for me. That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
But I think I had to go there to get here. So let's talk about that for just a second, as far as how I took a goal and I took it too far.
Yeah.
And I had the backing of a professional to help me.
Right.
So, do you find, I just hope that people learn from that story. I'm not, you don't have to answer anything on that. But do you find that happening sometimes? Do you find that, like, us super overachievers like to take everything to the end?
Yeah. And actually, one of the things that I often hear, especially if I'm seeing adolescent girls, it's kind of this refrain from their parents. She's such a good girl. She gets such good grades. She's such a high achiever. We don't know what happened. And it's just kind of this this thing that I hear over and over again. So I think those girls then, and men who also fit into the same sort of place as that, they are at risk for really anything that they kind of set their minds to taking it too far. Yeah. And so if that becomes food and weight and counting calories and counting, how much they're burning with exercise, then they're kind of set at risk to take it too far. And then let's say you throw in an identity piece. So, it sounds like maybe in Seattle, if you were it was new, lots of times moving and big transitions like that can kind of mess with our identity and our place in the world and who we are, just like with adolescent girls. I mean, they're going through a huge identity crisis. And that's a lot of times when people develop an eating disorder. But it can happen at any time. So a mom whose last kid leaves the house to go to college. She's not a mom anymore. Who is she? So any of those identity shifts.
Think about that time frame for. So what are some other examples? This is great.
Yeah.
If I would have if I would have had a little heads up that maybe somebody you are so positioned to go off the rails here.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so so more of the identity piece, it can happen. So you would have. I've had girls who they've gotten pretty far in the recovery in high school even, and then they go off to college. So college is another big time developmentally where you're going through identity stuff. You're trying to figure out who you are separate from your parents. You're trying to figure out, what your belief system is. You're making new friends. Lots of times you're going from a high school where you've known everyone to this big college where you only know your roommate who maybe you don't really like that much.
Yeah.
So those kinds of identity shifts. It can even be as maybe simple as I'm going to be a healthy person now. I'm going to shift from an unhealthy person. I'm going to be vegetarian. Now I'm a vegetarian.
I was that vegetarian for 10 years.
Yeah.
Because,
okay.
I did that.
Yeah. And then it can, I'm going to be vegan now. Now I'm going to be, and not to say that people who have that label are struggling with disordered eating.
It can very easily become that, though,
yeah,
right?
Especially if they have those other risk factors of anxiety and high achieving and perfectionism and those types of variables. So
yeah, I read the book Daring Greatly by Brene Brown. Have you read that one?
I haven't.
Oh my gosh, totally ties into this.
Yeah.
Totally. It's so perfect because it talks about how how we want to, it's all these exact same things.
I'll have to read it.
Yeah, it's just perfect. And it's where it's everything. So listeners, if you haven't put that on your reading list, I've recommended it a couple times, but it comes right down to this.
Okay.
And it talks about the things that we identify with, and it's perfect.
Yeah.
Sorry,
cool.
Go ahead.
No, that's great. Yeah.
So these changes in life, and then is it kind of a little bit of control too? Like if you feel like you're maybe changing some other stuff, and like you don't have control in a lot of different things, you start to control your food more.
Yeah,
I've heard that a little bit.
That definitely happens, and I know it can almost sort of take on a cliche because everyone has probably heard that at one time or another, but they've heard it at one time or another because it is true. Yeah. And I think for a lot of people, that piece of control, and that's what, so if we kind of go back to DEET offers a way of controlling this one piece of your life. And so DEET says, do this and don't eat this and eat this and exercise this much. And then pretty soon, instead of taking control of that one piece of your life, you've handed it over to DEET. And now DEET's in control of that one piece of your life that you thought you had control of. So
now it makes it even harder because now you're like, I don't have control of any of it.
Yes. So it's very seductive because it feels like initially you have control, but then it can quickly slide out of control.
Yeah. And I've seen that too, like just with, with somebody who's working on their body as far as like, okay, so I'm working on building this stronger and that stronger, and I want this leaner and that leaner. And, if you don't watch it, sometimes it can be a slippery slope and your body can control you instead of you controlling your body. And, and it's interesting too, like just from what I do, how a lot of people, they do make assumptions to that, like somebody who is fit doesn't have to worry about food. Have you heard that before too? Like it must be nice to just be thin, like just naturally thin and fit. And you're like, it must be. I don't know. I would never know because I've worked at it all my whole life.
Yes. Yeah. And those sorts of comments and judgments that we make about other people, they cut both ways. So they cut towards people who are overweight. They cut towards people who are healthy weight. They cut towards people who are underweight. And it doesn't do any of us a service to be judgmental about other people, but instead be accepting of them where they're at. And I think that starts with being accepting with ourselves and where we're at.
Yeah.
That even if you're trying to meet a goal, you're still accepting of who and where you're at right now. And it's almost paradoxical because how can I accept where I'm at right now if I'm trying to move forward to this other goal? So there's some tension there, but I think as you kind of can do that, then you can be more accepting of other people as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's, I can't remember something else that I read that was talking about how people make judgments against somebody else for the things that they are not secure with.
Yes.
So like people will say, "Oh, Stephanie, don't look at what I'm eating. Don't watch me work out." Like I didn't even notice, to tell you the truth. Unless you were paying me to notice, I didn't notice.
Right.
Like I'm just doing my own thing.
Yeah.
That doesn't. I really don't care.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
No, that's I'm just busy with my own thing.
Right.
Something else that helped me too in changing my thought process. So after I gained this 50 pounds, so I was like 118. So I gained 50, which put me up to like 168, which is only like 10 over where I am now. So it wasn't like, I just had to buy a little bit bigger clothes. I said, I'm not going to let my clothes make me feel fat. So I was like, I'm not going to wear something that's too tight.
Yeah, good.
So I put something on the fit.
Yep.
And then the next step too was I got a new job, and I actually ended up working with a government agency where they had made a lot of accommodations for the people who had disabilities. So I worked with a couple people who were blind, deaf, one person who had MS so bad that she had to wear braces so her hands wouldn't crumple. Like she was in so much pain.
Yeah.
Another guy that was only like maybe 3 feet tall. It took him forever to get to work every day. He was in physical pain. He was legally blind. And you know what? But they got up and they did it every day. And so during this time, all I could think of was, well, I really got to stop feeling sorry for myself for not being able to fit into my small clothes over there. It's really no big deal. I have full function of my body.
Yeah.
So I think and that's where my tagline, life begins when you stop chasing skinny. If you can really appreciate what you have going on, it's a lot easier to have a better life than to focus on, well, what I don't have. I don't have 6-pack abs, or I don't have whatever it is.
Yeah. And I think that can help with that perspective shift. And some people I know can also then use that as a weapon against themselves because they get it and they're like, yeah, oh, wow, aren't I the jerk? I shouldn't be. Here I am beating myself up because I can't get into my size 2 clothes anymore, and this person can't even see. Wow, I really am worthless. So then they almost use it. DEET actually uses that as ammunition against themselves to even make themselves feel worse. So, it's an important perspective to have on life, to be grateful where you're at and to recognize that not everyone, is given kind of the same lot in life, and then to stop there and not take it that extra place where you're beating yourself up for feeling differently because that's where you're at right now.
Yeah. That's really good.
Yeah.
Because so much of this is just so, and thank you for doing what you do, because this is one of those things, like, it is so not cut and dry.
It's not.
It is so hard to treat. I actually met a psychiatrist when I lived in Costa Rica who was vacationing there, and we were talking about what she did for work, and she said that she prefers to, so she doesn't specialize in this, but she prefers to stay away from eating disorders.
Yeah.
Because it is so messy. and so difficult. So thank you for doing what you do.
Well, thanks. And I really enjoy it. And it can be messy and difficult at times. And just to end on a happier note, there's really a lot of hope in it as well. I mean, people really do make progress.
Yeah.
People who have disordered eating, they make their way towards a more balanced life. People who have full-fledged eating disorders, they make their way into recovery. And oftentimes it's those people like yourself who are wanting to then help other people.
Yeah, because we've been there. We know how awful
you know how
that
terrible
feels. It
it
does
is.
not feel good.
Yeah. So it's really, for me, I get a lot of enjoyment and feel really privileged when I can work with a client and see that progress and see them move forward into having a more balanced and joyous and fulfilled life.
Yeah.
So that for me is a real privilege and makes it, some of the messier parts worth it.
Totally, right? Yeah. Because in the end, I've had a couple clients that they have been the biggest challenges for me. But when I finally see them make that progress, they get to the other side of it. It's just like, it's like a really big payday.
Yeah. Yes.
It's just,
my
gosh, yes.
Yeah.
You got
This
there.
is why I do this. It's that affirmation. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Well, thank you. And share just a little bit about how we can contact you. I will put all of your information in the show notes too, so people can find you.
Great.
So you're you have a website.
Yep, drjilltherapy.com, and I'm actually about to launch a new website, and it'll be that same website address, but I'm super excited about that.
That's exciting.
So hopefully in the next week or two that will be up. And then you can email me at drjilltherapy@gmail.com. And I can get emails that way. There's also contact forms on my website. If you just click on that, it'll shoot me an email as well.
Okay, and you're located right here in Charleston, which a lot of our listeners are here.
Yeah.
But my program goes actually internationally, so you can do Skype consultations and things like that as well?
I can. I prefer to meet with people first, face to face. But certainly, we could at least sort of have a conversation and then help point them in the right direction if they need to get help locally where they're at.
Yeah, because I have a friend who was talking about addiction and alcoholism and problem drinking, and she put her contact information out. So, because some people don't really know kind of what their problem is, or do they have a problem? Can I just talk to somebody real quick and let me know before I go in? And so do I have a problem? So you have a contact form, and people can
definitely contact me about that, and then I can sort of push them in the right direction if they're not local or they need something a little bit different. So
that's great, because I like to do that. Like I said, I feel like I'm the first line of defense when somebody goes, okay, well, I need to lose weight.
Yeah.
And, sometimes, yes, they just need a workout program. They need some guidance on nutrition. They need some support. But sometimes they need a functional medicine doctor. Sometimes they need to get help with disordered eating, something like that. So it's great to have that network. So
thank you
so much.
It's good. Yeah, thank you for having me. This has been fun. I've enjoyed it.
Great. And thanks for listening to the Stop Chasing Skinny radio program. If you ever have any kind of questions that you want to ask, or topics you want me to cover, or guests that you think would be great for the show, you can email us at radio@skfitlife.com, and we look forward to talking to you next week.
Out where the river broke, the bloodwood and the desert oak, holding wrecks and boiling diesels, steaming 45 degrees.
This has been a Clicks radio production. For further details, visit our website, clicksradio.com.